Hello and welcome to this edition of Group Talk to XSeries, Introduction to XPages Development, with our hosts Howard Greenberg and Paul Della-Nebbia from TLCC. Without further ado, here's Howard with the agenda.
Today is really going to, as I said, start off at the beginning and talk a little bit about XPages architecture and how it's different from the way we've developed applications in the past with our forms and views. And then we're going to go and show how you what tools you use in Domino Designer to create XPages, and how do we, drag and drop controls onto our XPage, and how do we convert or take an existing Notes in Domino application and show those views that we had in that application and display those documents that are in that application using XPages. Then finally, we're going to show some advanced XPages techniques you can do as you learn more about XPages, get a little more comfortable about it. The big thing we want to impart to you today is just XPages are not some difficult, mysterious thing. That they really, there's many levels of being an XPage developer, and it really is nothing mysterious. It's something you definitely want to start looking into and experimenting with and learning. Okay, so everything we're going to cover in this webinar today is based on that free course I mentioned before, Introduction to XPages Development. And this is a complete self-paced course that is going to get installed in your Notes client. And there are, in addition to lessons in that course that will explain everything we're going to cover today, there are also activities that you can do. So after this webinar, you can sign up for this free course and do the activities yourself. And that's going to give you some hands-on experience and make you feel more comfortable about this whole XPages thing. So again, as I mentioned before, this is really geared at people who know how to develop Notes in Domino applications but have not done anything with XPages, which, based on our poll, that's, a lot of you are in that category. Okay, so we have a pretty simple Notes application that we're going to convert to XPages today. And as you can see, it has several different views, and it's a listing of our customers. And if I go in and edit one of our customers here or open it up, you see that we have a variety of different types of notes fields that we're using. And we can go into edit mode, and we have radio buttons and checkboxes and a drop-down list. So it's kind of a basic notes application, but probably one that a lot of companies use, customer tracking or tracking of any sort. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our Notes in Domino applications. So when we create a new application as designers, we typically start off with a form. And those forms are templates that our users use to create documents. Documents is where all the data is stored in. The documents are then viewed with our views. That's a way to get a row and column format to look at our various documents and then to be able to open one up and view that information in the document, again using that form design. So our forms and views are very much tied into our documents. Now with XPages, it's kind of a different approach, one that people who are used to developing in other languages like Java or even web development are probably a little more accustomed to. And that's the idea that we have a presentation layer that's separated from our data. So we have our clients, either our browser or Notes client, goes through our Domino server and accesses our XPages. Now the XPages will then use what's called data sources as a way to define the data that's going to be used on that XPage. And those data sources in a Domino world can be our documents or our views. So we can have multiple data sources on one XPage. and we use those data sources as what's called the schema, or the way to define the data we're going to be working with. So now these XPages we're going to create in Domino Designer, and those will be compiled in Domino Designer when we save the XPages, and those compiled XPages are basically a Java application. So when we're running XPages on our Domino server, we're really running Java applications. Now the languages that we're going to use in XPages are primarily JavaScript, and it comes in two flavors. There is client-side JavaScript, which is going to execute in your browser or your Notes client, and this is going to be used to access whatever is in that client. But then there's also something called server-side JavaScript, and server-side JavaScript is going to run on the server. And because it's running on the server, we have the ability to access the Domino object model, including a subset of app functions. And these are the same app functions that you've probably been working with for many years. The Domino object model is the same object model you probably worked with if you've done any Lotus script programming or even programmed Domino agents in Java. So here's an example, and we'll get a little more into this later on, of using server-side JavaScript and using an @db lookup to look up a view in Domino. Okay, so notice that it looks very familiar in many instances, but it also is different. You know, this is still JavaScript, and so we're creating an array using JavaScript conventions and passing that array to our DB lookup to define the, in this case, the server and database name. Okay, so let's go spend a little bit of time talking about how we can create an XPage and how we work in Domino Designer with XPages. Okay, so when we first open up Domino Designer, I'm sure as everyone hopefully has worked with Domino Designer 8.5, and we have on the left side the Applications Navigator, which is how you access any of the design elements in your Domino application. Our XPages are also in the Applications Navigator, as you can see in this image here, and we can double-click any XPage to open it up in the XPage Editor, which will then open up in the center of the screen. We can then have on the bottom left something called an outline, and this is going to show us in an outline format what is on our XPage that is opened in the editor. At the bottom we have what's called a properties view, and this is going to show the properties for whatever element is selected in the editor or in the outline. And on the right side we have a controls palette, which is where are all the controls that we're going to add to our XPage to give it functionality. So everything we do on an XPage is done via controls. Okay, so our controls are dragged from the controls palette onto our XPage, and then our editor has a, the way we're looking at it now is a design view, which is kind of like a what you see, what you get editor. But then there's also a source tab where we can see the source code of the XPage. Now all XPages are basically just XML code. So here is an image of the XML code in that XPage we were looking at, and notice that it's all tag based. And when we add a control, it just adds a set of tags along with properties associated with those tags to our XPage. And we can edit this source code, and in fact many developers, as you get more and more experience, spend more and more time working in the source view as opposed to the design tab. But when you first start out, the design tab is fine, and you can create great applications without ever even viewing your source. Okay, so the outline view in our bottom left shows all of our controls, all the elements, in a hierarchical format. In other words, our controls are going to be often nested in each other. An example here is the edit box control is in a table cell that's in a table row in a table, which is on an XPage. The properties view at the bottom will show us properties for whatever is selected. Right now we have selected, you can tell by looking in the outline view, an edit box, which is where users are going to edit or add information, similar to a field in your forms. And this is showing us all the properties for that particular control that was selected. We also have an Events tab right next to the properties. And these are going to be where we can add events like an on-click event to a button to have some functionality happen for a particular event. And then the controls palette, as I mentioned, is on the right side. And then we also have on the right side what's called a data palette. And once we define some data sources on this XPage, this will show us the data sources that are on the XPage. And in this case, it's a document. So these are all the fields that are on that form that we can use on our XPage by dragging and dropping over. And we'll get more into that later in the webinar. Okay, creating our XPages. You first have to give it a name. Now, all you Domino developers are used to putting spaces in your name of your forms and views. You got to get over that because XPages have a little more restrictive naming conventions. You can't use spaces and dashes and things like that. Then we have the option to add our Domino data sources at this time if we want, or we can do that later. You don't have to do it now. And the nice thing about XPages, remember going back, when I talked about the presentation layer, the XPage development, we don't really care where the data is. And often we develop our XPages applications in another database, which is totally different than the data we're going to be showing. So we're really now, with XPages, we're getting that freedom now to create our applications in a different Domino application other than where the data is. Remember, going back to our traditional Domino development, our forms and views have to be in the same application as our data. We're breaking out of that mold and freeing ourselves to create our XPages anywhere we want. So just a little aside there. Okay, so once we open up our XPage in the editor, our new XPage, it's a blank, empty, white space. And if we want, we can just go and start typing text, just like a word processor, and you could highlight that text and format it, with any type of font, you want. So let's go through those steps in Domino Designer. Okay, so I have an application open in Domino Designer. And to create our XPage, there's a couple things we can do. We can go to Create, Design, XPage. We can right-click on our application and go to New XPage. We can go over to XPages in the Applications Navigator and say New XPage. Or we can open up our XPages design list like we have here and use this new XPage button here. And we'll just call it my first XPage. And so I could add a data source now if I wanted to. We'll skip that for now. And as I said, when it first opens up, it's just like a word processor or a new Domino form. It's just an empty slate. And we can put in a couple line feeds. And I can start typing. Big O Golf, customer information, and put some static text on our page. Now if I highlight this static text, I can go over to Properties, and I can come over to our font, and I can choose a font. And I can maybe make it bold and make it big and maybe center it. and maybe change the color while I'm at it. Use this nice color green. Okay, and I can do the same for our other text here at the bottom. And I can add my static text here. Okay, so that is, a way to add, one way to add static text. Another way would be to use a label, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But now let's say we want to preview our XPage. Now I'm working locally, and Domino Designer has a local preview capability. I can preview local applications, including our XPage, and I can do this by going up to these buttons up here. There's the first one here is Preview in the Notes client. Now when I do that, I'm going to be prompted to save my changes. And then it's going to open up, in this case, in the Notes client, as you can see. So that's my XPage that I previewed. Okay, or I can preview in a web browser. I can either click on this button to preview it in my default browser, or I can use the little drop-down arrow and choose one of the browsers I have installed on my system. I'll just use my default browser, and that will, let me drag that over. That will open up my browser and let me preview that XPage in my browser. So that's one way as you start developing applications. You don't need a server. You can work just in your copy of Domino Designer and use the local web preview. And that works good until you need to start getting into testing security and logging in and doing things based on different usernames and roles. Okay, so let's, the other thing is, if I were to make a change to my XPage, now at this point it hasn't been saved, and notice that in the tab at the top next to the title of my XPage there's a little asterisk, and that means it has not been saved. So I can do a Control-S to save it, or if I'm kind of menu-based person, I can go to File, Save, and then that asterisk goes away. Okay, so the real way we work with XPages is with controls, and we drag and drop controls over from the controls palette. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is use this little, in the controls palette there's an other option. We can click on that, position our mouse cursor, click in the XPage where we want that control to be, and we'll get a dialog box where we can choose what type of control we want to add, and then click the OK button and it will add that. The advantage of doing it this way is that we can filter the controls palette, and when we do it this way it's going to show us all our controls, whereas the controls palette might be filtered. You might be hiding a particular control you want to use. Okay, once we create and add some controls on our XPage, our outline will get populated. And we can click on a control in the outline, and it will highlight that in the editor, and will also highlight that properties for that control, where we can do things like name our control and go through all the different properties that are on the left in these various tabs. If I was in the source view and clicked on something in the outline, it would highlight that in the outline as well. We can also delete from the outline. Just right-click and choose Delete, and we can move and drag and drop things using the outline view. In this case, moving a table row. If we have any errors, let's say we're working in the source view and we typed a tag name wrong, we'll get a little X next to that error in the source view. We'll also get an error in the right side. And then when we go to save this, we'll have in the problems view, we'll show that we have an error. And we'll describe the error. Okay, so let's go through those various options. Okay, so let's say I want to add a table. So I can go to my container controls, and I can just drag and drop the table over. Now, not all the controls will give you a dialog when you're dragging and dropping them to the X page. Some will, some won't. In this case, a table will. And so I can set the number of rows, number of columns, and if I want a border on that or not. And click OK, and that's going to create my table. Now I can drag and drop things into the table. So I might want to add a label to the first column. Oops, it's not a label. Let's try that again. And I can add an edit box. An edit box will be where the users can type in information. So I'll add some edit boxes. Okay, so now I want to set the properties for these controls. Notice it didn't give me a dialog box in this case, but I can click in the editor on that control and go down to the properties, and I can change my label. Let's say we're going to use this one for the customer. And then if I want to use this other label, I can use the outline view to select that. Select that in the outline view, and then now my properties will be for that selected control. And let's say this is going to be for the phone number. And then I can also go to my edit box and maybe call this customer name edit box. And phone. I'll give it a more descriptive name for my edit boxes. Okay, so that would be one way to add the controls. As I said, the other way is to click on the other and then just click on the X page anywhere where I want that control to be. And this will show, notice it has a whole bunch of controls here. So now I can pick whatever control I want and click OK, and it will add that control. So that's just another way to do it. Most of the time you can use the drag and drop, works fine. Okay, so when I go to, now notice I haven't saved this yet, so I can do a Control S, save it, and preview it. And there's my X page with the label and the edit box where we can type in information. Okay, if I want to look at the source here, so let's say here's all the source of what makes this X page up. And again, I can go to the outline view and I can look at this particular edit box. So this, clicking on the edit box in the outline view highlights the control that makes that edit box work. This is called the input text. And you see that it has the ID that I created, and we have the properties down here that if we were to add a property, let's say we want to set the width. Notice that it had the change up in the source tab. Okay, now if I make an error, let's say I have a tag that's not closed and just make something up, and I go to save this, I'll have an error. So now notice that the little X appears next to the error. Also on the right side, I have a error indication. I can click on that. It will take my cursor right to the error. So let's say even if I was up here, clicking on that error indication will bring me back down to it. Also, note that in the problems, I now have a problem. So I can click on the Problems tab and see the error. Finally, I have saved this. I can close it, but this X page has an error, and that's indicated with a little X next to the title, and that gets bubbled up to our X pages and then bubbled up to the database here next to the name in the Applications Navigator. So if I go to open this up again and go to preview it, notice it still previews fine, but what it did was preview the last good compilation of this X page. So you really got to be careful whenever you're working with X pages and you do a save. You always want to check the problems view, make sure there are no problems, because so you could go preview this and think, oh, I'm fine, and you just keep working on, and then you're not seeing your changes and you're wondering what's going on. It's just showing you the last good compilation of that X page. Okay, so that's troubleshooting errors. So we're going to turn things over to Paul, and now he's going to get into what you really want to see and how do we start seeing Domino information in our XPage. Paul, take it away. Let me make you the presenter.
Thank you, Howard.
Okay, Paul, you should be the presenter now.
Okay. Thank you, Howard. And once again, good day to everyone. I have been fielding some questions in the questions area, so certainly if you have those as they come to mind, you can certainly post them there. And just to check, is everyone hearing me, seeing my screen? Howard, how am I coming through?
Everything's working fine, Paul. Good voice, and we see your screen.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on, and we're going to convert that application that Howard showed us earlier, the customers application. We're just going to build a couple of XPages, one to display the customers by name view, and one to display the customer information, basically what they would see on the customer form. Now, we're going to start out with the creating an XPage to display a Domino view. There are two methods. One is you can simply add a view control from the controls palette. The other approach is you can create a Domino view data source on your XPage and then drag over the columns that you want to display from the data palette. This screen here, or this image here, is showing us how to do it from your controls palette. So one of the container controls, like your table control, your tab panel control, your section control, one is the view control, and you use that to basically display, first of all, bind to a Domino view in a Domino database, and then display the various columns and the various column data from that. The other approach here is step one in your XPage properties on the data panel. You first define a Domino view data source. This is a view from the current customers.nsf database, and it has a data source name as customers by name. So first you define a Domino view on your XPage, and then when you do that, any Domino data source that's defined on your XPage is displayed in the data palette. And you can simply choose which columns from that view you want to display in a view control on your XPage. And the result of either approach is you have a representation of your Domino view in a view control on your XPage, and then you can set the properties for that view. Properties like how wide the view is, and you can do that on a column by column basis and so on. Some of the properties that you might want to set, one certainly that you'd want to set is at runtime open selected document using. So you'll want to define which XPage to use when the user clicks on one of those documents within the view control. So let's do that for our customers application. And you should be seeing Designer, or My Designer at this point. And I have the customers application loaded in a workspace within Designer. And if I take a look at some of the forms in this application, we see the customer form. That's the main form that we're going to use. If I take a look at what views are available, we see that there's a customer by name view, several customer views, customer by region, by sales rep, and so on. We're going to create an XPage that basically displays the contents of the customer by name view. Let's take a quick look at the design of that view. And really all I want to show you here is that there are 4 columns that we really do want to display. This column here, the sales order lookup column, is in fact a hidden column, and we're not going to display it in our XPage. This is used for some sort of DB lookup purposes in the application. Okay, so we would do that using different techniques in XPage design. So we want these first 4 columns. Also notice that the customer, city, and contact column, all of those columns are provide the click sort capability, but that's not available in the phone column. Okay, so jumping over to my XPages design list, I can see that there are no XPages in my customer's application at this point, so I'm going to create a new XPage, and I'm going to call it my customers by name XPage. And I could add a data source at this time directly to the XPage, and I could choose the appropriate Domino view, but in fact, I'm going to use the different approach where we just add the view control from the panel. So here is my customers by name XPage, a big empty slate at this point in time. If I jump over to the source, I don't see a lot here. I see the tag for the XPage itself, the view tag that would be equivalent to your HTML tag, and the language that we're using, XML. So XPages, the source language is XML. I'm going to switch back to my design pane, and the first thing I want to do is, in my controls palette, I want to select the view control and drag it and drop it onto my XPage. And at this point in time, I'm interrupted with this dialog asking me which view. So Domino view, it's in the current application, and it is the customer by name view. And now it's showing me the columns available in that view, and I'm going to deselect that lookup, that DB lookup column. Don't want to display that in my XPage application either. And OK. And I get that view control rendering of my customer by name view. I can see the 4 columns that are available. And what I could do is simply preview this at this point in time. And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing my customer view rendered in a browser. I'm using Chrome here, and it automatically got this pager at the top so I can page between my customers. And I only have a set of about 50 customers displayed here. Okay, so let's continue on with some other things that we can do. Okay, you can set your pager control properties. There are different pages that are available to you, and that's what we're seeing on this next screen here. So you can go with pager sample 1 through 7 to get different controls available in your view pager, or you can create your own custom control. A couple of other properties that you may want to set. You may want to set your column header properties. You may choose to check this off if you want to allow the user to click the column header to sort the column. You can also choose checkbox, that particular property, to basically enable the user to check off a checkbox right in the column header to select all of the documents within that column, and then presumably you would add some sort of functionality that can operate against all of those selected documents, like delete them. If you wanted to, sounds drastic, but certainly could do that. You could also check that this is an icon column if the underlying column in the Domino view data source is in fact an icon column. Within your column properties, you might set the width of the column. And let's check out some of those properties. So back here in Designer, first of all, I'm going to select my complete view right from the outline. So I've got my view control selected, and on the Display tab, I'm going to leave these two default settings, Show Column Headers and Show Pager in Header, and also add this one. I'm going to show the pager in footer. And as I make that selection for that property, I can actually see the impact right on my design in my design editor. I'm also going to set the maximum number of rows per page to 15. Now, I can select my pager, my view pager controls right in my design editor, or I could select them here in the outline view, and then I can set those properties. So for this pager that's in the footer, I might go with, instead of the default sample 1, sample 5 to get some additional controls, or I could create a custom pager, and through this interface, I can simply choose, what I want to show in that custom pager. Maybe a pager selector in the middle, and then a couple of separators, and then appended at the beginning and the end, we can have the first and last control. So something a little different from my pager at the top. I can also select the column header and set some of the properties, like whether or not this is a sort column. And I'm going to do that for all of my columns, for my customer, city, and contact, but not my phone. Okay, that underlying phone column is not sortable in the Domino View data source, so that option is not available here. One other thing that you might want to do is right on your column properties, you might set the width. But let's not do that and preview the changes that we have so far. And I'm surprised that I am seeing the same XPage. I must have an error here. Let me just dirty that, save that, and preview again. And that's a little better. That's what I was expecting to see. I now see my pager at the top, the default sample 1 style, and my custom pager at the bottom, where I can select the last page or any pager from the pager selector and so on. Now, what I'm also seeing as I page through is I'm seeing some jiggle between the columns, okay, where they're expanding or collapsing to show the content. So I want to address that property right now by setting the width of the various columns. So back into Designer, I could select my customer column and choose to set the width to, for the customer name, it's a little wider, maybe 200 pixels, and for city and for contact as well, I'm going to go a little wider, about 100 pixels. And let's preview those changes. And I will go to my page 2, and I'm not getting that column jiggle at this point in time. Okay, so that's addressing that problem. And the next thing that I need to work on is I'd like to provide the user the ability to click on these various customers and open up and see the contents of those documents. So I'm going to need another XPage for that. But before we do that, let's return to the presentation and preview some of the next steps in building my simple customer tracking application. So I need to define an XPage that is going to basically provide the purpose of that Domino form, the presentation and the editing of documents within the database. So going to create a new XPage, going to define a Domino document data source on that XPage. There's different ways to do that. You can define a Domino document data source at the time you create the XPage or afterwards. So to an empty XPage, you can go to the XPage properties, and on the data panel you can choose to add a Domino document data source. Now, after your data source is added to the XPage, the next step is to add the controls to display the contents of the various fields within the document. So you would add edit box controls to for most of your fields, but for your radio button fields or your combo box fields, you would add the appropriate selection type control. Now, there are two approaches to adding your controls to display the field contents. One is to do it one at a time, basically select the appropriate control from the controls palette and drag it right onto your XPage, or once you have a data source defined on your XPage, a Domino document data source, in the data palette there will be a listing of all of the fields within that data source, and you can simply select which fields you want to show on the XPage or select them all, and then simply drag and drop them right onto your XPage. And that's a much quicker approach, and we're going to see that in action in a moment. And let's do that right now. So I've got my customer by name XPage, okay, and it's showing the contents of that customer by name view, but I want to work on this part of the problem where the user can actually open up and see the contents of these documents. So I'm going to need a new XPage, and before I create it, let's take a look at the design of the form for that XPage. So this is the customer form, and we can see a number of fields defined here. We see a customer field, a contact, an address field. We see a number of pairing fields. We see a type field, which is a radio button type control, and we see a display type field. And this is a common technique I'm sure that you're familiar with, where in edit mode you show the radio button control to select the type of customer, but in read mode you're going to show the contents of this computed for display field. So we see that for type and display type. We see region and display region. We see status and display status, and other products and display other products. Okay, so you're familiar with that technique. Point is that when we add a Domino document data source based on this customer form, we're not going to see any of these computed for display type fields. They're not going to be available. So let's see that. So I'm going to create a second XPage. I have my customer by name XPage. I'm going to create a new XPage and just call it my customer XPage. And again, can add the Domino document data source at the time that we create the XPage. And in fact, I'll do it this way this time. And it is from the current customer application, and the form that I want to base this data source on is my customer form. And the data source name, it defaults to document 1. And then if you added a second Domino document data source, it would go to document 2, and you can change that as well. So OK to create the XPage. And I have what appears to be a blank XPage. But if I take a look at the data properties for that XPage, I do see that my document 1 data source has been defined here. I also see in the data panel my document 1 data source with a listing of the fields, and notice there are no display region and display status and display other products, just the non-computed for display fields, let's say. And what I could do at this point in time is I can take one of two approaches to define the actual controls that are display the contents of those fields. One is I can do it manually, And I'm just going to do this quickly, and then I'll undo this. I'm going to create a table. Okay, 12 rows by 2-column table. And then I'm going to, for each field that I want to display, I'm going to provide a label in the left-hand column and some sort of a control, maybe an edit box control in the right-hand column. So for this label, I might set the actual label property to customer name. And for this edit box control, its name or identifier for the control is called input text 1. On the data tab, what I need to do is I need to bind this to the appropriate field in my document data source. In my document 1 data source, I want to bind that to my customer field. What I also should do is back in my label tab, I should specify the target for this label control, and that is input text 1. So I wanted to show you that manual approach because it's a little cumbersome, certainly compared to the approach of using the data palette. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo all of that. I'm simply going to select right in my outline view my table, and I can delete that. And I'm back to where I was at the beginning, where I have an X page with a data source defined on the X page. So now using my data palette, let me surface that. What I can do is I can simply select all of these fields in my document 1 data source and drag them right onto my X page. And I am interrupted with this dialog where I can make some changes, maybe deselect one or another field if I wanted to, or change the default type of control from edit box to, for region, I might want to go with combo box, and for status, I might want to go with a radio button control. But when I scroll through my list, I don't see a radio button control. So we just have a subset of the type of controls that you can choose in this interface, but you could always come back and change them later. So for any selection type control right now, I can only go with a combo box or list box, so that's what I'll choose at this time, and then maybe manually change that a little later on. Type would also be some sort of a combo box or selection type control. Now also there are some options here at the bottom. I can choose to add a submit button when I click OK, and I will need to add a submit button so the contents of these documents can be saved. And I can also add a messages control where any errors or validation type errors could be displayed. So I'm going to go with that as well. And I can also choose to save or not save these settings each time I use this interface to create or to add Domino document data sources right onto my X page. Okay, so when I click OK, here is the result. I automatically get a 2-column table. I automatically get a label for each one of the controls. And the label name is actually based on the actual field name. So we have a field called sales potential, and the actual label name, sales space potential, was generated based on that camel case and used in the field name. Okay, so that's fortunate. Also, I can see that this label, sales potential, is automatically its target field is specified as sales potential 1. So when I take a look at my sales potential field, okay, I can see that the name or the identifier for this control is sales potential 1. And when I go to the data tab, I automatically get that Domino document field binding. So it's bound to the document 1 data source, specifically the sales potential field within it. And when I click on that customer edit control, that's also an edit box control called customer 1, and it is bound to the customer field in my Domino document data source. Okay, so certainly a much quicker way to do it. Let me preview this and see what we get. And that's what we get. We get the equivalent of a form on this customer XPage. And you know, at this point in time, we can use this to create documents, but certainly not to display existing documents. And that is what I wanted to work on. I wanted to work on a way to, you know, basically the read-only property, or the read-only part of this problem, where I want to display the contents of these existing documents. So let's return to the presentation. See what I need to do there. So there are 2 changes that you need to make to your view XPage to basically link to your form XPage or your display XPage. And one of those things is you need to identify one of your columns in your view control as with this particular property, show values in this column as links, and then specify how to open those documents, either in edit mode or read mode. So that's the first step. The second step, shown on this next screen, is for your view control, and you can see the selection right around the entire view control. You go into your view properties and you specify which XPage you want to use when a document is selected in the view control. So let's add that to our application. So I'm going to return to the design of my customer by name XPage, and the 2 steps that I need to perform is, first I need to identify a column, and in the display properties check off to show values in this column as links and how I want those documents open, and in this case read-only mode. The second step is to select the entire view panel, and I did that in the outline, and in its properties, right on the view tab in its properties at runtime, open the selected document using the customer XPage. And that's all I need to do, so let's check that out. I'm going to preview my XPage, and I'm seeing those changes. I'm seeing a selectable link in my customer column, and when I click on that, it opens up the contents of that document in my customer XPage XSP. You know, if we take a look at the URL, we can see the ID of the document that was opened and the action that was performed on it as well. Okay, so what I would like to do at this point in time is, just continuing with this design, I need a way to get back to that view. So this submit button is not doing the job. The purpose of the submit button is to submit changes, to save the document, save any changes to an existing document, perform the validation, and so on. So I need some sort of a button to return to the view. So let's first preview that in the presentation. Okay, there are 3 types of buttons. You actually just add a single button control from your controls palette, and then in the button properties you specify the button type. There are 2 predefined types, submit and cancel button types, and they have very specific functionality. One is to submit any changes or submit the contents of the document and save the document provided it passes validation. And the cancel button is to cancel any changes and simply typically return to, you know, some sort of a view to display the contents of the documents. Now you can also specify a button type of button, and then you can program those general buttons, with whatever purposes that you want. So here's the procedure for creating a submit or cancel button. You add a button control from the controls palette and then choose the appropriate button type. Now, also for your submit and cancel buttons, what you need to do is in the XPage properties, you need to specify the next page on success or cancel. Okay? So if a page is successfully submitted, it passes validation, what page do you want to go to? If a page is canceled, which page do you want to go to? In terms of your other button types, you could provide a return to view type or an edit button to switch to edit mode. And then for those, in your events tab, you would program the appropriate event, in this case an on-click event with the appropriate action. This screen is just showing us that the visible property, also the actually this is the rendered property, you can choose to compute its value based on a condition. So we can see the submit button selected. These are the properties for the submit button. You may not want to show that submit button when the document is in read mode. So that's the type of computed value you would specify for the visible property. And that's what we're seeing here. Document 1 is editable. I want to show that submit button only when my document data source, document 1, is editable. Okay, so let's add a few of these buttons. Okay, so on our customer X page, we already have a submit button. I'm going to add 2 more buttons. Okay, one of these will be my cancel button, and the other I'm going to provide a label of edit, okay, to switch from read mode to edit mode. Now, let's review that submit button. So again, this was generated at the time I dragged over my fields from my data source, and I can see the button type is submit, and if I go to the events tab where things are programmed, the on-click event really doesn't have any simple action or script associated with it. It simply has this server option, full update. And for my cancel button, now for my cancel button, I want to choose a button type of cancel. And on my events tab, don't need to program the event. It also has this server option, full update, but in this case, this is checked off. Do not validate or update the data. Okay, so there's no validation, there's no saving of the data when the cancel button is selected. Now, to get those two to work, one other thing that I need to do, and that is in my XPage properties. So these are my XPage properties. This particular property, next page on success or cancel, is specifically related to submit or cancel type buttons. Basically, what is the next page to go to? And that's where I specify my customer by name next page. Okay, just before I test this out, let's go to that edit button. So for my edit button, the button type is button. And for this, I do need to program the on-click event. And I could program it using JavaScript, or there is a predefined simple action, and these are very similar to your simple actions that are available in your form design. So you have a number of document type simple actions. There are basic actions to open a page. There are document actions, things like, I need a sip of water. Let's see if I can say actions now. Okay, that's much better. Okay, so there are document actions like change document mode or create response document or delete document. So this is familiar to you in your form design. So just like there are simple actions available in form design, that design construct has been surfaced in your XPage design. So what I want here for my edit button is this simple action, change document mode. And through this interface, this WYSIWYG interface, I can simply select edit mode and which data source to switch into edit mode, and that's document 1. And that's the results. So my on-click event for my edit button is now coded with this simple action, change document mode and switch to edit mode. So let's try this out. I'm going to preview my customer XPage. So it's just creating a new document or attempting to. We see a submit and cancel and edit button. Really shouldn't see all of these. Probably shouldn't see that edit button. Let's get to that in a moment. But let's try out this cancel button. So when I hit this cancel button, in fact, I'm returned to that customer by name XPage. So on success or cancel, I'm returned to that customer by name XPage. Okay, so that's working for me. If I open up an existing document, again, I'm seeing all 3 buttons. So I'm going to want to, show or hide these buttons based on, whether or not the document is in edit mode. So we'll get to that in a moment. But we can see that we have an edit button, and I can switch to edit mode, and that's probably when I'd want to hide that document. So let's work on some of those refinements. So first off, that submit button, well, let's work with the edit button. With that edit button, I can go to the button properties and specify this visible property as compute value. And in this JavaScript editor, I have this reference panel on the left where I can choose different libraries, like an @function library. I can also choose a global objects library. And I can see one of my global objects is document 1. That's my document 1 data source. And if I expand that, I can see that there are some methods in there that are interesting. One is editable. So right from my global objects library, I can double click on this global object, document 1, my document data source, and then dot, and I'm presented with, in my pop-up, all of the methods that are available. I just start typing and I reduce that to is editable, and that's the one that I want. Okay, so when document 1 is editable, really I don't want to show the edit document, or sorry, the edit button. So right now this formula is document 1 is editable. My edit button should be visible when it's not editable. So this is the opposite of your hide when programming in your form design. It's not hide when, it's when is this visible? When is this particular component rendered? Okay, so I'm going to have to reverse the logic on that and change that to not. Okay, not document 1 is editable. So at this point in time, I really haven't done too much programming. I'm just kind of selecting from the library. I've just copied that into the clipboard. And I want to use similar logic on my submit button's rendered property or visible property. So I'm going to compute that value, and I could simply paste in from the clipboard. And my submit button, I do want to be visible when document 1 is editable. For my cancel button, I'd really like to display that, under both conditions, when the document is editable or when the document is in read mode. But the thing is that that cancel label is not appropriate. So anytime you see a diamond, that tells you that you can compute that particular property. So for the label, I'm going to choose to compute this under certain conditions. And I'm going to just put in some JavaScript conditions here. Just typing in some JavaScript in the script editor. Document 1 is editable. Under that condition, I want to return true. Or sorry, no I don't. I want to return the appropriate label to this label property. So when this document is editable, what do I want on my cancel button? How about cancel changes? Okay, and otherwise, maybe something like return to view. Okay, now that's JavaScript, and that might be a little unfamiliar to some of you, but basically JavaScript is the programming language in XPage Design, so if you don't know it, you're going to want to learn it. And we do have a course for that, by the way. Okay. And now I see that there is not a hard-coded label on that cancel button. Its label is computed. So let's preview some of those changes. And I can see my cancel button now has this label when the document is in edit mode. This is a new document in edit mode, cancel changes. I can see my submit button to submit the document if I were to choose to create one. I don't see that edit button. So I'm going to just cancel those changes. Maybe open up an existing document. I can see my edit button. Okay, it is now rendered, okay, because the document is not editable. And instead of cancel changes or cancel, I see this return to view. Okay, just one more refinement to my buttons. And specifically that the last change that I made where I computed the label for my cancel button, I'm going to change that. And just commented out that JavaScript and going to use my reference library and specifically going to use my @functions reference library. So we see a lot of familiar @functions. They've been ported to a JavaScript library, so there are things like @if. Okay, so @if, and let me just borrow some of this text and paste it into my @if and make some adjustments. So @if document 1 is editable. Under that condition, I want to cancel changes, and I'm replacing these colons with commas. I have one too many. Howard, are you seeing a problem with that?
Paul, you have too many left parentheses at the beginning.
Right. There we go. Okay. So that should look more familiar to you. Okay, so that looks like an @if. @if, first the condition, then your action, and then your else action. What might be a little surprising is I didn't separate those arguments with semicolons as I would do in the formula language in form design. This is JavaScript. This is a ported @if function to a JavaScript library. It has the same type of arguments, but those arguments are separated with a comma in JavaScript. So let's change that, and I'm going to make one more change just to show that this is coming from my @if formula. And let me preview that. Okay, so I'm seeing that change there. Okay, so some of this will be new. JavaScript, for some of you, will be a new language to conquer in your XPage development. But certainly what they've done, or what IBM has done, is they've done a great job of taking over some familiar things like your at-if functions and your Domino document object model. Those are available in your reference libraries, and they're available in your XPage design. So that's very useful. Okay, going to continue on. With the editing part of the problem. Okay, so in terms of creating and editing Domino documents, certainly now we can read those documents, but we probably want to spruce up some of these controls, for actual creation or editing, like the selection controls. We're going to define some values that the user can select for those. Okay, so just to show us where we're at right now, if I preview my customer XPage, I don't have anything to choose from for my type of customer or for my region. Okay, I'm going to go to a pre-built XPage in my Workbench application, and as Howard mentioned, this entire course is downloadable free from our site. This existing XPage shows us a pretty broad array of the type of input controls that you can define. So we can see an edit box control, kind of a bread and butter control for your text fields, your number fields, your even date time fields with a date picker. This is a multi-line control where you can define how many rows and columns for display. We might go with, I don't know, 20 columns and 5 rows. Okay. We can see that there is a list box control defined for our region. And all of these controls, like your edit box control, are selectable from your controls palette, so you can simply drag them and drop them right onto your palette. Other products. Let's see how this was defined. If I take a look at the values, for other products, there's a hard coding of the values, just as you might do in form design. Okay, so you might hard code the selectable values for a particular selection control, or you could compute the values. Okay, so we'll see how you can do that as well. Okay. All right, just a couple of slides on creating your selection controls. So to create a list box or combo box control, simply drag it from the controls palette into the appropriate location on your XPage. For your list controls, you have an option to allow multiple selection for your list box controls. And then on the Values tab, as I previewed a moment ago in Designer, on the Values tab, that's where you would define your selection values. And just like in form design, you can define, if you will, an alias and an actual stored value. Okay, so you can do that in XPage Design as well. Or on the Values tab for a particular selection control, you might want to provide a selection list of values by looking them up using a DB column or a DB lookup. Okay, and there's different ways to do that. I'm going to show you this in XPages. Here we're seeing returning, a DB column returning from the current database or from the customer database, returning the customer by name view, specifically column 1 from that customer by name view. So it's going to return, all of the customers. And just a little bit of warning here, and that is when you're using these add functions, you are coding in JavaScript. These are, in fact, JavaScript methods within a library. So JavaScript rules apply. Okay, so the function names are case sensitive and arguments are separated by commas. This is showing a radio button control, and you can display it horizontally or vertically. Same for your checkbox control. And let's do some of that. So for type, I'm going to define some values for that, so I can add some values. And what I might do is actually go to my form design, where these are already defined. So here in my customer form, I might select type and just copy all of those customer types into my clipboard. And then back in my XPage design, rather than add them individually, I can import a list and paste those values. Select the separator. There is no separator that separates the alias from the value. We're just going to use the alias as the value. Okay, and let's preview that. Okay, and I'm seeing that in a combo dropdown. I'm seeing all of my choices available. So let's do something similar for the region, but for the region what we'll do is we'll actually compute the regions, and to do that we have this customer by region view. So let's explore the design of this. Here's my customer by region view, and the first column is sorted and categorized, and it shows me all of the available regions. So I'm just going to borrow that first column and basically use a DB column to return all of its values. So what I'm doing right now is I'm copying the alias name for this view, customers by region view. I'm going to need that in my DB column formula. And back in my XPage, okay, rather than add individual items, I'm going to add a formula item and going to use my DB column formula. Okay, so just double clicking on that from my functions library. And then I want to return from the current database, so I can go with at DB name to return the name of the current database. And the column is what I have copied in the clipboard, customers by region view, and specifically want to return column 1. So let's try that out. And that's what I'm seeing here for my region. Okay, I can now select that. So using a DB column in my XPage design. Okay, and that is all my material. Howard, do you want to rejoin me here?
Sure, Paul. Let me...
Just while Howard's getting set up, I hope that did show you how easy it is to convert or migrate a simple notes application to an XPage application. So I know it's daunting initially, and there's certainly a lot more you can do in XPage design, and that's one of the things Howard is going to show us right now. He's going to show us some advanced techniques in XPage design.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Yeah, in the course that Paul and I mentioned, the one available at TLCC Introduction to XPages. This is the course, and as you see, it's in the Notes client. So the first, what we went through today is in Module 2. We didn't cover anything on Domino Designer and Eclipse, but that is also in the course where you can, if you're new to Domino Designer 8.5.x, you could go through that module and learn about the Applications Navigator and working sets, and even if you have been using Domino Designer 8.5, you might pick up a few tips and tricks that we present there. But in Module 3, I'm not going to go through all these, but we have several demonstrations of some more advanced techniques that we teach in our other XPages courses, and so I'll just show a few of these. One of them is, I mentioned before that XPages can have multiple data sources. So in this particular technique, we're going to show how you can combine a view and have the ability to edit a document right on that same XPage as the view. So I'm just going to, let's see, move that browser to my window here. Okay, so here's the presentation, the XPage, and so I have a view on the left, and I can click on any customer name, and notice that on the right side, the details for that customer are very similar to the same information that we were going through in what Paul did in the webinar. The same type of form. And I can even go into edit mode and change the city to a different city and state. Okay, so and I can submit it, and notice the changes there now. And if I go to a different customer and come back to that one, that changes, it's changed in the underlying document. So that's just one of the things you can do with XPages, just a small little sample. It's really, the possibilities are infinite in terms of combining different documents on one XPage and using things like a repeat control to create sets of data from different documents. And I'll show another example of that in a second. But first let me show this other example. So how many times, in the Notes client have you wanted to show charts? And there were some third-party applications. There were ways to do that, but it was kind of not easy. Now with XPages, we have the ability to do charting in both the Notes client and in the browser. And this is using the Dojo controls that are built into XPages. So this is in a browser. I have a view with, this is just showing the detail, but I basically have our 4 regions and different totals, and I'm making a pie chart out of that data. And this is all done using the included Dojo libraries that come with XPages. I didn't have to add anything special. And the nice thing about this, as I mentioned, is that this works in the Notes client. So here I am in the Notes client. Notice, it is the Notes client, and it works exactly the same way as it does in the browser. So that's another nice thing that you can do with XPages. Okay, another thing I mentioned before, we can have different data sources or multiple data sources on our XPage. So here we have an XPage. I'll preview this, that has a bunch of customer documents here, and what I can do is I can edit these documents right in the view. And not only that, I can edit multiple at a time. Okay, so I can edit that one, I can save that one, and I can change this one. So I can edit directly on my view. In this case, it's actually not a view, it's a repeat control, and then we're using something from the extension library called the in-place form to allow us to do the edits directly on the XPage and not have to go open up another XPage that holds the document controls to display the documents, fields, and things like that. Okay, the other last thing I'll show is something you actually can do on your own mobile devices, and that is taking that application that we showed today and bringing it to mobile devices. So if you go to tlcc.com/demo, not the URL on the screen, but just tlcc.com/demo, use your Android or iPhone device, you will get this application that it's the same information we've been talking about in the webinar, but now it's in a mobile device, and notice that it's formatted very nicely for, in this case, an iPhone. I can, not only that, I've added to this application a Google map showing where that particular customer is located. So we've integrated Google Maps into our mobile application, and this application probably took, not counting the Google Maps, might have taken maybe 15 minutes to create. So if you're interested in that, be sure to either check out our mobile XPages course, or we'll have a webinar in October, our next webinar we're doing. Okay, so just kind of a review. We've talked about the architecture of an XPage. I've shown you how, in the advanced demonstrations, that the data sources we can have multiple data sources, and that the XPages are truly a presentation type tool that we're using to display different data sources. I've shown you how we can use different clients. It doesn't have to be the Notes client or a browser, but we can have mobile devices. And in the extension library, there is the opportunity to have data sources other than Domino using JDBC to access DB2 data, Oracle, SQL, any relational data that you can have a JDBC driver for. So XPages are definitely a very powerful tool that's very expandable beyond our Notes client-centric Domino server or Domino database world. Okay, so let's sidetrack for a second, or talk about something probably even more important than actually creating your first XPages application, and that is, how do we get ramped up to get ready for XPages development? So as you can see, the data we were working with today was all Notes and Domino data, and we were using the Domino object model was kind of underlying our data source. So we definitely want to have our Notes and Domino development skills. Paul also showed how the core programming language in XPages is JavaScript. So you definitely want to start ramping up your JavaScript skills. And because this is all web development or web browser based, you want to be comfortable with HTML and CSS. Someone, I think, had a question earlier on the questions about how to add a scroll bar. Well, that's all easily done using a CSS style. Now, then, of course, then you need to learn how to, work with XPages and the various controls. Now, if you follow the various bloggers out there, some of the XPages experts, you hear a lot and read a lot about Java. And I don't want you to think that you need to be a Java expert to create XPages applications. Clearly is a place for Java, and as I mentioned before, Java is the underlying programming language, or the underlying language that our XPages get compiled to. They are Java applications, and it's very easy to add Java to our applications. And you can use Java Beans, Java libraries. You can take Java libraries you might use elsewhere in your company and import them into your XPages and start using that Java code. But you don't have to be doing that, and as a matter of fact, that's kind of more of an advanced technique. You probably won't be doing that initially. typically, most developers, as they start learning about XPages, kind of follow this progression. What we did today was clearly in the first step of this progression. Paul, in the webinar, we went through simple actions, used a little bit of JavaScript, and you saw how we were able to convert that Notes application to XPages with very little server-side JavaScript and obviously no Java itself. Now, as you learn more, you're going to probably then take some of this Lotus script code you might have in agents and that are sitting behind buttons and things like that in your forms and start rewriting that business logic from Lotus script to server-side JavaScript. And you'll probably start to use the source pane more and start to use some of the CSS styling to fine-tune the appearance of your XPage. And once you start doing that, you'll also probably start thinking of new applications you can create in XPages that, and start moving away from just purely migrating, but how can we use XPages to create further functionality and capabilities for your company. And finally, the last step of this progression is getting into Java and working with maybe relational data, web services, social feeds like from LinkedIn and Connections and Facebook. But not everyone is going to be a Java expert. Some of you may already be Java developers from using other tools, but many of us are have been doing Domino for a while, and we're kind of at the Lotus script level. And so it takes a little bit of time to get to that Java level. But you don't have to get there. You can really create very good XPages applications without any Java. Okay, so in terms of what TLCC offers in helping you on this path, we have core Notes and Domino courses that teach you, if you're new to Notes and Domino, teach you that. And we also have courses that teach you the Domino object model using Lotus script or Java. And then we have our courses for XPages developers, starting off with a JavaScript for XPages development course. And then our first of our 2 core XPages courses, developing XPages using Domino Designer and XPages Development 2. And then we have a course on mobile XPages, as well as a course on Java for XPages. And as I mentioned before, the mobile XPages course you can take self-paced at any time, but we do have an instructor-led online course starting October 22nd. Okay, at this point, we're going to get into questions and answers. The way we handle this is in the questions pane in your GoToWebinar interface. You can ask your question that way. We won't be responding to raised hands, or you won't be asking your question verbally. So please ask your questions in the questions pane, and Paul and I will answer your questions on the webinar. So Paul, you have any questions ready to go?
I have a question from Praveen, and let me just surface that question. So can we build search functionality in the XPages views we create? Certainly. You can provide categorized search functionality. You can also search on a column or provide an index search. So all 3 filtering capabilities that are available to you in your Notes design, your Domino, traditional Domino design, they're also available to you in your XPage design as well.
Okay, we have a question from Ali. Are XPages used only for small components of Lotus, or can we use them to develop a complete and comprehensive web application? Well, I think you clearly can develop complete web applications. As a matter of fact, there's a new site out called collaborationtoday.info that the people behind OpenNTF came out with. That's entirely built in XPages. As a matter of fact, they're going to make that design available on OpenNTF. And in fact, the OpenNTF site is built on XPages, as well as sites like XPages.info. And then also, if you go to the TLCC site, our course catalog is based on XPages. So not only can you do complete websites with XPages, I would say that you could probably do a much nicer interface quicker than using the traditional Domino web development.
Okay, and a question from Ali, which I just surfaced. Can we use Lotus script and call agents in XPages? First off, any existing agents that are scheduled agents that run on some scheduled event on your Domino server, either a time schedule or when a document is created or modified or when mail is received, any of those agents will just simply continue to run in your XPage application. So if your XPage application is creating or editing a document, that will trigger that type of scheduled agent. So no need to change it, it's just going to run as is. In terms of initiating or calling a Lotus script agent from your XPage application, yes, you can do that as well. The challenge that has to be dealt with is the context. Basically, passing the current document context to that agent. So in your Notes application, that's very automatic, but you do need to set some things up in your XPage application to do that. Do you want to add to that one, Howard?
No.
Do you have a question?
Sure. Let's see. There was several questions on the extension library. We're not going to obviously have time to go into details on that. But just for those people who are new, the extension library is a set of controls. I don't know how many there are, but well over 50 on different controls. Some used to strictly for appearance and user interface. Some are used to pull in, for example, the relational databases that I mentioned, just a wide variety of functionality. And that extension library, a big subset of that is also available directly from IBM, called the Upgrade Pack 1. And the Upgrade Pack 1 is, as I mentioned, a subset of the extension library, but you get it from IBM, and it is IBM supported. So the Upgrade Pack 1, for those companies who must have IBM supported software and can't use open source software, that is an option for them. It is not updated as often as the extension library, so therefore bugs won't be fixed as often, as well as new functionality won't be added as often. And then when we get into 854, a lot of what's in the Upgrade Pack 1, I think all of it, is going to probably be in the 854 product, and you won't have to install anything extra. So that's just a way of bringing in a lot more functionality to the XPages developer. And it's something, again, you go out on OpenNTF and you can read some of the documentation. And it's also in the extension library. Once you install it, there is a sample database, a demo database that demonstrates most of the controls that are in the extension library. And that brings me up to another question I saw. What iPhone emulator was I using? And that is actually in the extension library demo database, and you can use that to, emulate the iPhone using your own XPages, as well as what is in the extension library demo database, and we cover that in our mobile XPages course.
Okay, question from Karan. How can we have a computed for composed field, or how do you create that within an XPage? There is a computed field control that you can use for the same purposes, and that's available right from your core controls palette.
Okay, Paul, we got a question from Lisa. If we install 854 on our server, do we have to update the clients as well, or only if we use XPages for the Notes client? If you upgrade your server, first of all, let's be clear, 854 is not out yet, and we will talk more about that in our November webinar, and I think IBM has said they were shooting for a first quarter of next year release. But you can always upgrade your server, and it will still work with your, older version clients. So that's not a problem. And in fact, I think even the XPages for the Notes client, the fact that you have an 854 server and that client is an older version won't matter unless you're using unless you replicate that database locally and you're viewing those XPages from a local database. And then you might have issues if you're using some of the new functionality.
Okay,
Paul?
I have a question from Rick. And is there currently a calendar view ready for prime time in XPages? You can certainly create a calendar view using similar techniques that are available to you in creating a calendar view within Notes. So it is a bit cumbersome currently, but in the extension library, there is a iNotes calendar view. And that is a lot easier to work with and much more of a drag and drop design. So if the extension library or the upgrade pack is available to you, then you want to use that particular control.
Okay, we had a question from Brian. Can XPages be used to create relational databases even at a basic level? Again, any data sources used with relational databases are in the extension library, just to be clear. And you would not actually create the relational database. What they do is use JDBC to access the relational databases. You most likely would create the actual database using whatever database tool you're using. So that should be something that, again, the XPages is just a tool to access that data.
Okay, I've got a question from Ali. What about cross-browser compatibility and for handhelds as well? Compatibility, always a fun topic. Well, it depends. What browsers do you want to support? Certainly the WebKit browsers, very good, i.e. We've run into some compatibility issues with IE7. I think those went away in IE8. Compatibility issues, particularly with the display of view controls. In terms of handhelds, if really the easiest way to create a mobile application or to mobilize a Notes and Domino application right now is using the mobile controls that are available in the extension library. And maybe I'll make myself the presenter here, Howard, and show them something else. Okay, so here in Designer, I'm going to switch to my extension library palette. Okay, and this particular palette, in addition to my core controls and container controls, which we've seen, we see a number of extension library controls that are available to you. The iNotes control has this iNotes calendar control, nice way to develop a calendar. There's a complete set of mobile controls for mobilizing or creating a mobile application. So, back to Ali's question, what about, multi-device support for your, for using these mobile controls? These mobile controls will support your WebKit browsers, your iOS browsers, or your iOS devices, your Android devices as well, and to an extent, some of your later BlackBerry devices. Beyond that, support has not been announced in terms of availability for other devices. So really it's going to depend on the device and the type of desktop browser.
Okay, I'm just going to switch control back here, Paul. There's a question from Mohan. Can we use jQuery instead of Dojo? Well, Dojo is built into all XPages, but there has been extensive blogging about using jQuery. So if you just do a Google search on jQuery and XPages, you'll find a lot of information about that and a lot of examples.
I have a question from David. This is related to our paid courses. And if you've been to our site, you see that courses have a price, a dollar price, but they also have a number of units associated with it. And this is related to basically volume purchases. So our larger customers will purchase at a discounted rate a block of units and then use those units to assign courses to the various people in their organization.
Okay, there's a question from Pooja on mobilizing Notes apps. Do they require a VPN? The use of a VPN is totally unrelated to Domino. That's just something that if your company has that level of security that requires a VPN, that won't really have any effect on XPages or anything at the application level. So I don't think that that's not really a Domino-related question. So if you want to use a VPN, that's fine. If you don't want to use one, that's fine too.
Okay. Question from Mohan about creating a lot of data sources and other objects in your XPage. What's the performance hit? Certainly the more things that are available in memory, will have a performance hit. And in memory is, on both sides of the coin. So that's on your client side, and that's also on your server side as well, so your Domino server as well. So, for every XPage that a user is working with, there is a component tree, all of the components that are available on that XPage, including the data sources. So that's built on the user's system, and there's a corresponding component tree in server memory on the Domino server. Fortunately, XPages do provide you with a lot of useful techniques, AJAX techniques for just refreshing a part of that component tree. So generally speaking, the more that you put on an XPage in terms of components and data sources, yes, that will have an impact on performance, but through AJAX techniques, you can choose to only update or only execute a certain part of the XPage for a particular action that the user performs. And that is the #1 way to improve the performance of your applications. So XPages do provide those AJAX techniques.
Okay, we're starting to run out of time. I think we can take 2 more questions. There's a question from Khadija. Can we use cookies under XPages? Yes, you can use cookies. There is a library to access the cookies and set and read values, as well as you can always use it under client-side JavaScript, just like any other web application. Paul, do you have
one more question, and this is from Karan. Do we have authors and readers fields available in XPages? So XPages just provide a new face for your Notes and Domino applications, so all of your Notes Domino security does apply, including author and reader fields. So yes, you can create a readers or authors type field on your XPage. It's not a specific control that's available on your control palette. You don't choose that this is a, author type control or reader type control. You just add an edit control, populate it with the appropriate value, and then you set a particular property on that particular field to a readers type or authors type field.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up the webinar. Paul, unless you had one more question, or?
No, I think I'm done.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're out of time. We want to finish on time. So just to remind everyone, on the screen we have the contact information for GBS as well as TLCC, and that TLCC, we are offering a special 20% off for any of the webinar attendees. You can just go to tlcc.com/webinar to see about that, or contact us here at TLCC. We're available on Twitter. Emails are there. So any way you want to contact us is fine. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing everyone at our next webinar next month.
And that concludes this edition of Group Talk. Thanks for watching. To engage in conversations with us, visit twitter.com/gbsknows. To stay up to date, like us on Facebook at facebook.com/joingbs. And to watch entertaining and informative videos, visit youtube.com/gbsknows. And don't forget, visit our website and send us an email at gbs.com and info@gbs.com. Thanks again.